Hearing on Senate Bill 336. And Leslie, if you could explain the bill, and then we'll invite Senator Golden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Senate Bill 336 prohibits candidates for state office or the principal campaign committee for candidate for state office from accepting contributions in excess of amounts specified and from sources unspecified, delineating different thresholds for different state offices and from different sources. It creates specific types of political committees to be registered with the Secretary of State and prohibits a person from controlling more than one political committee at one time. Senate Bill 336 delineates what constitutes contributions made to or from a single political committee, prohibits certain political committees from accepting contributions in excess of amounts specified and from sources unspecified, and prohibits certain contributions made by certain political committees. It clarifies what constitutes separate elections. It establishes no contribution limits from a candidate's personal funds or from public bodies, and it provides the Secretary of State with rulemaking authority. Finally, Senate Bill 336 repeals campaign finance laws established in 2006 via ballot measure 47, and it sets operative dates for certain provisions as November 9th, 2022. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Leslie. Senator Golden, welcome.
Mr. Chair, thank you, members of the committee. Thank you very much. I am delighted to be here to testify on the issue that really caused me to run for the legislature more than anything else, and in support of measure Senate Bill 336. My name is Jeff Golden. I represent Senate District 3, which is much of the Rogue Valley, Medford, Ashland, Phoenix, Talent, Jacksonville, the Applegate Valley. I was also chair in 2019 of the Senate Campaign Finance Committee that produced SJR 18, which became Measure 107, which Oregonians approved in last November by a margin of 78 to 22%, which I believe is the largest margin that a ballot measure has received in Oregon, or so I've been told. I think I feel like I'm on safe grounds in saying that Oregonians want authentic, effective campaign finance reform. And I also think it's safe to say that at least politically minded Oregonians who pay attention to politics, have a question in their minds right now. They're watching us with a question. And the question is, are we going to create a system designed around our benefit and convenience, that is to say, to accommodate those of us on the inside, those of us who hold office and run for office and who run for campaigns and who traditionally contribute to campaigns? Is this new system going to be crafted for us or for the benefit of all of the people of our state who are looking to us for better solutions to Oregon's problems? That's a pretty big question. What we have right now is a very rare chance to show that we're genuinely here to serve, and maybe, and this is what's bigger than this issue, maybe to restore some level of public trust in Oregon government. And I think we all know how much the current level of massive mistrust is hobbling our progress on the issues we care about. So it is crucial to get this issue right. So what does that mean, getting it right? It does not mean, in my view, an exact prescription that says X dollars is the right limit for legislative campaigns, Y dollars is exactly the right number for statewide races. Now, partly because there is no exactly right number. We can and will deliberate those dollar figures as this process continues. To get it right means we start by getting clear on what Oregonians want in campaign finance reform. And I have 2 pages that I've asked staff to share with us on the screen today, and I'm going to ask for the first page right now. Staff has been extremely helpful in getting this presentation together. There'll be just 2 pages. This is the first, and it's based on my years of covering campaign finance and experiences on the campaign trail, listening to voters, town hall listening sessions, being part of this debate for 2 years. This is what I believe Oregonians want. This is the touchstone I used in crafting Senate Bill 336, you'll notice, I'm just going to take a minute to go through it with you. You'll notice that the first category is minimizing undue influence of money, lowering the cost of campaigns, subjecting all contributions to clear limits, and minimizing the reality or perception that aggregated contributions influence policy decisions and legislative votes. Number 2, increase the and diversify participation in democracy. Set limits at levels relatable for most Oregonians. And just to give an idea, I said 1% of median income. Assure equal access to power and opportunity to occupy seats of power. Enhance the significance of small contributions and allow contributions to be pooled to encourage gathering of small donations. I want you to keep in mind those 2 bullets because I'm going to return to them, the aggregation of money. And finally, build public trust and transparency. Maximize disclosure and identity of donors. Ensure that funds flow in a clear, easily understood manner without complexities that obscure sources or amounts. Design rules to be transparent, readily understood, and enforceable, and minimize systemic advantage to any particular party, ideology, or interest. That's my view on what Oregonians want and what would pass the test that we are doing this whole project in the public interest. I aim for simplicity in providing only 2 categories of donors: individuals or individual entities that are all held to the same dollar limits. And here I'd ask to change the page and look at the second page. I think it'll make this easier to follow. So there's only 2 baskets: individual donors and 3 very carefully selected committees that can aggregate individual contributions into larger donations. So what you're looking at in this table, the first, I think you're going to be most interested in the 2 columns, the 2 left-hand columns, what can be given to the campaign committees of statewide, or rather legislative candidates, non-statewide, and what can be given to statewide. For the most part, think of non-statewide as legislative races. There are no provisions on local elections in this bill. So the first column basically think of as legislative races. The second column think of as the 5 statewide races: governor, attorney general, secretary of state, treasurer, BOLI commissioner. Then the first 4 rows are what I've called individual entities. And you'll notice they all have the same dollar limit. So these are the numbers I chose. I chose them because they will, in my view, according to the case law we've studied, very easily pass the bar that courts have set for where limits need to be for candidates to have viable chances at victory. So for all the legislative races, House or Senate, the limit from individuals and these other top 4 rows, I'll go back to that in a minute, is $750 per election, which is to say if you want to donate to a candidate for a primary and a general election, double that. It'd be $1,500. For statewide candidates, governor and the others, $2,000 per election. Double that if you're giving in a primary and a general, it would be $4,000. Now, we thought about different limits for Senate and House, for governor and the other statewide offices, but simplicity ruled the day, and we went with those single figures. Now, those are true for all of the entities, starting with individuals, the top left box there. Then that would be true. Those would be the limits for what one candidate's committee could give to another candidate's committee. Then the third row, they would be the limits for what also a statewide, say, a governor's candidate committee could give to a legislative or a statewide race. And then the fourth box is multi-legislative candidate committees. I'm not going to go there. That gets complex. And I wasn't really interested in including that category. I got legal advice that this will be a sturdier bill legally if it's in there. But you'll notice that the limits are low. They can give the same as an individual can, so I'm not worried about it. Now I want you to skip down to the bottom 3 rows. There are 3 committees provided for in this bill, and this is key, the small number of committees. I have seen proposals with 8 or 10 or 12 different committees, and to me that really violates the transparency principle, because the more committees, the more conduits, sort of interlocked conduits to a campaign's coffers, the harder it is to follow the money. And the harder it is to follow the money, if you can't follow the money, you're not going to trust the system very much. So I've kept it to 3, and I want to explain them. The first 2 are a state party committee, and only 1. So the state Democratic Party, state Republican Party, and then the next box down, legislative caucus committees, and those would be the 4 caucus committees we have in the legislature. And I am allowing all 3 of these kinds of committees 20 times the limit, a factor of 20 more than the individual limit. So up top, we were talking about $750 limits. You multiply that by 20, and you get to $15,000 for statewide races. You multiply the $2,000 individual limit for governor and whatnot, and you get to $40,000 per election. So I allow that for state parties and caucus parties because they're not special interests. Their purpose in life is not to forward a particular issue outcome. Their purpose in life is to increase their party's members in the legislature or the state house. And that's a whole different thing that in my view is kind of legitimately the way politics runs. It doesn't have the distortion of special interests the way that other committees might. And then finally, I want to get to small donor committees at the bottom, also with that multiple of 20 times the individual limitation. And again, the idea here with having a single multiple of 20 is for simplicity. You could make arguments for different multiple for different committees, but all we've got here is an individual level and then a committee level that is 20 times the individual level. And I need to spend a 2 or 3 minutes on small donor committees. These are key. You are going to see them in other bills and other proposals. And the idea here, and I would go back, why don't we go back to the first page if we can, if that's easy to do, of the campaign principles. You'll see under Roman numeral 2, the emphasis on enhancing the significance of small contributions and allowing them to be pooled to encourage the gathering of small donations. The idea here is that you can really stimulate small donors, people who never thought about giving to elections before. If you have friends and cohorts and networks who are out there encouraging them to participate, this will make the $5 and $10 and $15 and $25 contributions matter in a way that they don't today. And this is really an equity measure because if we don't have these small donor committees, you can imagine a race between a relatively affluent Oregonian and someone from a marginalized community with very few financial assets. Your affluent candidate, through business networks and Rotary networks and social networks and the college old boy networks, might be able to amass 100, 200, 300 $750 checks or more. Your person from a very marginalized community can't do that. That's not their social milieu. They do not have that access. Maybe they'll find 5, 10, 15, 20 $750 checks. So the equalizer here, what they do have very likely is a whole lot of people who really want to see them elected. And they can say to 20 or 30 of those people, go start a small donor committee and walk your neighborhood, go to your place of business, anywhere you socialize, your favorite restaurant, find everybody you know and ask them for 5 or 10 or 15 or $20 for this committee. You might say that anybody's, free to donate $15 on their own, and that's true, but they don't. That's not the way politics works. So this is really igniting small donations. And I see it as small donor committees as a key element that really justifies, it's behind that objective of giving away to aggregate money to enhance the importance of small donations. The last thing that I will say about that, and I am getting to the end because I know you've got more people to testify, is that some do oppose these small donor committees and would suggest that it's much simpler if we have just one limit in our entire system that everybody adheres to, i.e., no aggregation of money. They say that would be simpler. It is true that that would be simpler. But there's also a concern that it inherently advantages the party more supported by labor. That would be the Democratic Party, because labor historically is in a culture and has habits of pooling money. Historically, that's true. But I just do not accept that there's an inherent bias of small donor committees, and has to be, for Democrats. I know that there's the resourcefulness out there to create small donor committees for pro-life people, for Second Amendment activists, for Chamber of Commerce members, for fellow parishioners of many faiths. I could go down the list. This is a tool that could be open to all Oregonians. It does not inherently bias to one side or another. And I think they're key to a vibrant, highly participatory system, the way I said. I do have one more point, Mr. Chair, and that is the bill that we saw and that came to the Senate in 2019 that was not acted upon on the Senate, in my view, had one major flaw, and that is it had small donor committees, and it said since individuals could only give 200 or 250 into those committees, that would take care of special interest politics, and that those small donor committees should be able to give unlimited amounts to candidates, or some would say very high limits, unlike my bill, which has this factor of 20 limiting what those committees can give. Some would have them give very high limits. I strongly disagree with that, because if you have any affiliated group who are getting together for a reason, they could be what we think of as a left or a right reason, but if you have them getting together to pool their money and then can give very, very large checks, we end up with a problem that we're starting with, which is undue influence of concentrated money in our system. So if I could insist on one guideline, one where I don't see much room for negotiation, it is this. If we're to have a system that passes a straight face test, there is no room for very large checks, admittedly a subjective term, from any entity, whatever you want to call it, with an identifiable financial interest in the outcome of legislation, period. If we break that rule, we fail. Mr. Chair, you've given me ample time to present, I think commensurate with the importance of this issue. I very much appreciate it. Would be happy to answer questions if there are any.
Thanks for your thoughtfulness, Senator. Are there questions of committee members? Yes, Senator Gerard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The question I have has to do with on page 3, line 18, as a caucus leader, you've made it so that I can't control the caucus PAC and my own personal PAC at the same time. And I think that's going to have to be corrected.
Let me be frank. Chair Wagner, Senator Gerard, I want to be frank. I had some legal assistance. I was not being a lawyer. I wanted a bill that had a good chance of withstanding court challenges and involved attorneys. And I actually did not know that this bill did that. There are probably other instances of that, and would be more than open. It doesn't seem right that as a caucus leader, you wouldn't be able to do both those things. And I would like to remedy that. I would bet there are other details in this bill that could use similar attention.
Okay, and then I'm just going to make a statement. And I know you're trying to be fair, and I really appreciate that. And I noticed that that was one of your primary objectives. But when the union can give $15,000 and an individual can give $750, I'm sorry, I just don't see that as being fair. So I just think that disparity has to become less if you're going to look for a bill that's fair to the left and fair to the right. Just for the record, I wanted to see what I could do in my district, just for the record. I mean, I raised a ton of money, but I raised it for the caucus. I spent $750 to put myself in the voter's pamphlet, and I never spent another dime, just for the record. And I did fairly well, but that's because I've been around for a while, and I happen to have a favorable district, just like a lot of us do. But I just kind of want to throw that out there, that not everybody is going to be in a position that they require a lot of money. The money goes to maybe 3 or 4 races, as you are aware, and those races are expensive. Next door to my race was the one in Salem that each side spent over $1 million. So, I mean, that's how, and I totally agree that the dollar amount is getting out of whack, and we should be able to reduce that. But I think it needs to be done fairly, and your side depends extremely heavily on unions, and they invest big dollars. We have been outspent on the Republican side outside of this last election, almost on I'd say a 3-2 basis for the last 3 or 4 election cycles. So if you're going to constrain someone, I think you need to constrain the unions who have a positive feedback loop, which means that, look, you give me money, I give you money sort of scenario, versus the individual who, they're just there for, because they might agree with your philosophy. So I totally agree that we need campaign finance reform. I just think it needs to be done a little bit. I'm just tweaking a few of these numbers, and I think we can get there. And, I said on your committee before, this bill passed out on a party line vote. But I am happy that you notice that there does need to be some changes, and we can discuss numbers down the road maybe a little bit more. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you,
Mr. Chair, would you like to save further discussion for?
Yeah, I would like to hear what he has to say.
Another date, or would you like a brief response?
Oh no, please do, and then I've got Senator.
I'll just say briefly, Chair Wagner, Senator Girod, thank you. We have worked together. You were on the committee I mentioned. I appreciate that. You made a number of points. I just want to respond to one. Your sense that having small donor committees would, almost by definition, advantage Democrats over Republicans. And I differ with you on that. I do say, if you look at the historical record, Democratic donors have aggregated more than Republicans have. But I'd be happy, just as an exercise, to compile a list of, I'll say 20, what appear to me very viable small donor committees that would very likely vote Republican more than they would Democrat, just as an exercise to give the idea of how I think this could be used in parity between the two parties. I'm going to put that on my homework list, if that's okay.
Well, if I may, I'd like to respond, because the two entities that have been given right to life, and say the NRA or the gun lobby or some of the other ones, right to life in a big contested race might give $5,000, and on a race like myself, I might get $250, $500. The gun lobby I mean, in a big race, they're not going to be given a whole lot either. These are not big donating groups. The unions will write, some of those union checks are $100,000 or $200,000 per race. And that's what you've got to get away from. And so it just really, it really bothers me. Now, I know that you got a limit of 15,000, but it just is extremely unfair that just the individual is at $750 and the union is at $1,500. So, I mean, I grant you there is going to be some constriction here, but I don't think that small donor PACs are going to make up a big chunk for the Republicans. I think it'll be a small chunk. And so, I mean, that's just where I'm the one that raised the money, so I know where it comes from. So I just like to throw that out there.
Again, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to go off to my other committee and watch this hearing tonight. Very much appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Did you have 1 minute for Senator Burdick to ask a really quick question?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I absolutely do.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for your work on this, Senator Golden. My concern, having run in the only other cycle where we actually had campaign finance limits, and they were tighter than what you have here. They were like $100 a person as opposed to $750 a person. But nevertheless, $750 a person is a very tight limit. It's far tighter than the federal limit, and some of these races, as it was pointed out earlier, can reach $1 million plus for each candidate. And this, of course, the Constitution prohibits limitations on spending, which the previous one did limit spending. Of course, the whole thing was thrown out in the court. So my question is, if the limits are set too tight and candidates cannot gather enough funds to, number one, hire staff, and number two, put out mailings and social media and so on to spread the message of their campaigns, or if they have to decide one versus the other, they don't have enough money to reach the voters in a way that will educate the voters in a particular way about what their campaign is about, that vacuum will be filled by interest groups doing independent expenditures campaigns. Or in another scenario, it could be done by a very wealthy candidate who has no restrictions on how much money they could spend. They could just put in the whole $1 million for their campaign and not have to bother with anybody. So what is your answer to this concern about the growth, the increasing role of independent expenditure campaigns, or by wealthy people basically buying offices?
Chair Wagner, Senator Burdick, honestly, thank you for that question. I think it is the question in the context of this conversation, because if you took that concern to the extreme, we almost wouldn't be imposing any limits. It is the most vexing question of them all. In this bill, there are a few things. One, the limits that I've proposed, $750 per election, $1,500 per election cycle legislative, $2,000, $4,000 for statewide, is substantially more than a number of states for that reason. States where they've been taken to courts, challenged that the limits were too low. Courts said, no, these limits are fine. I'm not going to remember. I think I'm going to be followed by someone who remembers state by state. I remember, I think, Colorado and Kentucky and others. So that was one reason for putting these numbers higher than I would think is ideal. Another, that's also the reason for allowing these three committees. There are those who would say, let's not do caucus committees or party committees anymore. Let's just have individuals. And this is an opportunity to get those campaign coffers up to a certain amount. Now, your comment about wealthy individuals, I actually don't know what to do about that in any system. My understanding is the courts are strongly supportive of an individual's right to contribute as much as he wants to his or her own campaign. I don't have an answer for that, other than the fact that I believe we should go to public financing, but that's another day's discussion. When it comes to the independent expenditures, one front where we're trying to temper that, it is a real concern. One front where we're trying to temper it is in the transparency and disclosure measures, so that we're no longer seeing big contributions from Oregonians for puppies and pretty flowers, but from the actual donors. And we all know the negative blowback that a certain individual got and his candidate got in the last governor's race. So that disclosure is not the panacea, but more as paid for by kinds of measures which are coming is part of it. But I think the last thing I'd say is this is a real issue, independent expenditures and the way they can take a candidate's control of his or her own campaign away from them. And it's one we have to grapple with. I don't think we can let it drive these limits so high that we're defeating this whole purpose and losing the confidence of Oregonians. It's something we have to bear in mind. And as I say, there are a couple factors pushing back in our favor, but I want to grant you that it's the challenging part of this.
Thank you so much, Senator. I know you actually are chairing a committee right now, and that you've given us a half an hour of your time to share your thoughts. I want to thank you also for your service during the last legislative session on doing so much work. This is not the last opportunity for engagement. There are multiple bills. There are bills in the House. There are conversations that are happening, but I really do hope that we'll continue to grind and go through the public process and come up with a good product.
Well, I'll just say once more, Mr. Chair, I really think this is our best shot at restoring a level of public confidence in what we do here, and it's even more important than campaign finance reform itself. So I really appreciate the attention your committee is giving to this.
Thank you, Senator.
I see you. Thank you.